Welcome to Reali-Teen, the show for teens, by teens, about teens. I'm J.K. Larkin, and I'm not kidding, and I'm your host. Today we'll be talking about cults. Now, I'm no expert on cults, so I'd like to introduce you to one. I'm joined today by Kieran Larkin, a high school religion teacher and father of 2 teenagers, including myself. Dad, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. And I guess I should start right off by saying I don't really consider myself an expert on cults either. But as a high school teacher, I'm very, very well aware of how dangerous cults can be. And I've tried to learn something about them to convey to my students. So I don't want to say that cults are a passion with me. That would be an overstatement. But I do think that it's important that we raise public awareness about them.
Well, I'd like to hope that cults weren't a passion for anyone.
I agree.
Now, I think we should start off by answering the most important question. What is a cult anyway?
Well, it's a very basic question, and you can define the word in a number of different ways. I think on the screen we have the Harper's Bible Dictionary. Cults are systems of worship centering in devotion or homage to a person or an object, and I guess that's probably as good a definition as any. Fact of the matter is, you can look at the word cult and interpret it very broadly. You can say at root, it's a group of people who follow the same leaders and share the same basic ideals. So you could say we all belong to an American cult. But that's a very, very broad-based definition. When we use the word cult today, I think we're talking about something much more specific. We're talking about cults that behave in destructive ways. They use different kinds of mind control techniques to bring innocent people into the cult to essentially rob them of their individuality, their free spirit, their independent decision-making, to be used, to advance whatever the goals of the cult leader happen to be. So they're rather dangerous and rather sinister and covert. So worthy of discussion by all means.
Well, from this definition of a cult, it sounds like a religion could be seen as a cult. Can you explain why a religion isn't actually a cult?
Well, again, going back to the basic definition, when we're talking about cults, we're talking about people who have been used, exploited, manipulated, pretty much sucked into joining a group that doesn't present itself honestly, and are victimized, into slowly, gradually having their whole value system subverted. That's very, very different from a standard religion. Certainly I like to think that people of faith have found their faith openly, individually, without compulsion or coercion. It's very, very different with cults because people are being used. We can talk a little bit later on about how that happens. But I think the other thing that we should talk about too is when we use the word cult, while a tremendously large number of cults have religious themes, cults don't have to be religious in their orientation. As a matter of fact, there are a number of different types of cults.
As we can see right here.
You're way ahead of me. As you can see on the screen, certainly what makes a cult is the technique that it uses to draw people in and attract them. A lot of cults use religious themes. They say to people, you look like you're someone who's interested in a deeper appreciation of God or a closer union with God. Come in, join us, see what we're all about. We can make that happen. Other cults might, talk about a person's political beliefs and say, you look like someone who really cares about your country. I can sense a patriotic fervor. We share those same, democratic values as you do. Come in with us, see what we're all about. It's what's known as the lure. The lure could be religious, it could be political, it could be psychological. We see a whole variety of cults here. Also on this very, very interesting list of types of cults, you see a cult and you see satanic cults. And to a certain extent, they're from an entirely different breed, where a lot of the other cults on that list use mind control techniques or thought reform techniques. Satanic cults and occultic cults, there's a redundant phrase, will not use mind control. They will use blackmail and extortion to bring someone in and keep that person in. It's an entirely different animal. And maybe we can draw a little bit more of a differentiation later on, too.
So there's more than the one different type of lure? You could lure people in with blackmail or with extortion?
Well, no. I think blackmail and extortion are entirely different things. They are other ways to bring people into a cult. But when cults use those techniques, that's very, very different from using mind control. Maybe that's a good place to start, is to talk about mind control. Mind control is something, certainly I've never used. I don't really know how to use it. And that's probably all for the best. Mind control techniques, thought reform techniques, brainwashing techniques, those are all descriptions for the exact same type of a procedure. They are when you gradually alter a person's views by manipulating that person's environment in different kinds of ways. Prisoners of war can be brainwashed to reveal military secrets if people know how to use those brainwashing techniques. That happens very, very often when a country is at war. It's a very, very similar thing to what we see cult leaders doing to bring people into the cults. It's simply that their whole purpose is very, very different.
Now, how do these cult leaders develop their sense of mind control? How do they find out that they know how to mind control people?
I wish I knew. That's the reality. I'm guessing at this. I think that, well, first of all, what I should say is cults always center around one top dog, one person who's generally considered to be a charismatic leader. I am guessing that perhaps early on in life, a person who may be, I'll say, egocentric, megalomaniacal, might realize that he has a certain way with people, that he has a certain charismatic personality, and really instead of using that for positive purposes, uses it to exploit people. But how a person arrives at that decision to be exploitative, how he learns to use these techniques for his own advancement, that I'm really not quite sure of, in all honesty. We could draw up a list of different cults that people are aware of, perhaps, from having read about them in the newspapers. And our audience might be aware of the names of some of these cult leaders. We could perhaps talk about them. Some cults find their way into the headlines. A lot of cults, most cults, never do at all. Maybe what we should talk about is the number of cults that are out there, the number of people who are victimized, just to indicate the seriousness of that.
Before we get into that, though, there's a couple types of cults on this list that we haven't really gone over.
Okay.
What is a racist cult?
Well, a racist cult is basically a cult that centers around prejudice, one group directed against another. When we think of a racist group, we tend to think of the Nazis, we tend to think of the Ku Klux Klan here in the United States. I don't really know if I would call them cults, because I don't know that they use mind control techniques as much as they are just a bunch of people who have found one another with a shared sense of bigotry or discrimination uniting them. So I don't know if I would define them as a cult, but that's essentially what is holding those people together. That sense of our race is better than your race. It's almost an us against them type of mentality.
Okay. And the other one that we haven't covered is communal or self-help cults.
Well, same kind of a thing. You go right back to the lure. My lure to bring you into my cult might play on your religious convictions. You're looking for a deeper understanding of God, or closest is God, come to me, I can help you. You're looking to show more patriotic fervor, you're very devoted to your country, my group can help you with that. If you simply want to get more out of life, if you're afraid that you're not all that you can be, then a self-help cult might play on your desire to be a better person, to get more out of life, and use that to bring you into a cult.
All right. Now, you said earlier that there were tons of people that are involved in cults. Let's just see the numbers.
The numbers are frightening. You can never get an exact number of cult members. You can never get an exact number of how many cults are out there. And if you read different articles on cults, you'll get different figures. That's the reality. I have read numbers that suggest that here in the United States alone, we're not looking globally, there could be anywhere between 3 and 10 million cult members. I mean, if you do the math, that could be the population of New York and Chicago combined.
Yeah.
That's quite frightening. There are a number of cults operating in the United States. Again, nobody knows the number for sure. I've read anywhere between 2,500 and 5,000. Probably the vast majority of them religiously themed cults. And of the religious cults, since America is still primarily a Christian country, I think a lot of the religious cults are Christian themed cults. But there are others as well. So we're talking about a sizable number of people, who have in some way, shape, or form been exploited. And it's a number that really we have to pay attention to, I think.
Yeah. Well, with 2,500 to 5,000 different cult organizations just in the U.S. alone, let's see what some of the names of these are.
Well, I think when you look at the names on this particular list, some of them are recognizable. The Unification Church was a cult that was centered around a cult leader named the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, who I believe came from South Korea. Years ago, he was probably very, very well known for his mass weddings. He would assign wives and husbands to one another, marry hundreds of couples at a time. We could go into the theology behind the Unification Church, but I think that we probably are not going to have the time to get into all of these cults specifically. You look at some of these others, the Hare Krishna group, which is actually a short form of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, is actually an international cult that's Hindu themed. Most religious cults operating in the U.S. are Christian themed. That's not. And yet there are a number of Americans who belong to that. The Church of Scientology, in the headlines very, very often because of people like Tom Cruise and John Travolta and his wife. Time magazine a number of years ago featured Scientology on the cover and labeled Scientology the most dangerous cult in America. So these are cults that people are aware of. Heaven's Gate was a very, very interesting one. Its cult leader had a cult following of college graduates who were computer programmers, very, very highly educated, high-tech young people who had actually been convinced by this cult leader, whose name was Applewhite, that they were going to be brought to paradise in a spaceship that was hiding behind the Hale-Bopp comet, waiting for them to board and carry them to the promised land somewhere in outer space. And it's almost incredible to think that people will believe stuff like this. But if a cult member knows what he's doing, he can actually convince people of the righteousness of his actions.
I assume that didn't go that well for the college students.
They all died. Each one of the members of Heaven's Gate took cyanide-based liquids and essentially committed ritualistic suicide, not because they really wanted to commit suicide, but because they believed that after they drank the solution, when they awoke, they'd be in a spaceship heading to the promised land. So people can be quite gullible, or at least can be easily manipulated, perhaps more so than they might think. It's scary. Well, even just two other cults I'd like to point out on this list. The People's Temple was run by a cult leader named the Reverend Jim Jones. And, his cult was based in a settlement in Jonestown in Guyana in South America. And he reached the headlines when he ordered all of his followers also to drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. 800 were killed simply because he said, drink this, because he felt the authorities closing in on him. So it's incalculable, the number of lives that have been lost by people who've gotten caught up in these cults. The Branch Davidians were led by a cult leader named David Koresh, young man who absolutely was convinced he was the second Messiah. And he actually got involved in a gun battle outside of Waco, Texas, with federal officials, again, where a number of his followers died. So we're talking danger here, we really are.
Well, seeing how dangerous cults can be, maybe we should go into our most important topic. Are some people more susceptible to cults than others? And if they are, how can they avoid being susceptible to cults?
Well, I guess that's the crux of today's discussion. This is Reali-Teens. We're talking about teens. And to a certain extent, teenagers are especially susceptible, which I think is why we're having this discussion. To put matters as succinctly as possible, cults find that the best way for them to attract new members is to look at people who are going through transitions in their lives. When teenagers are graduating from high school, for example, and about to go to college, especially if they're going away to college, they are going through a major transition in their lives. They've been living at home, their parents have been there supporting them, they have a circle of friends around them, and then they are excited to go to college. They're excited to live away. The whole dorm experience is something that they're hoping to begin. But once they arrive on a college campus, perhaps hundreds of miles away from home, they suddenly realize, gee, their whole support system from high school is missing. They're kind of by themselves. They may not have many friends on the college campus. They may not know a single person. Cults are aware of that, and they will station cult members on college campuses, deliberately looking for people, usually freshmen, who feel as if they are lost. A cult recruiter, for example, might station himself in the cafeteria or the library or the student union center and just look and see, do I see any students who seem to be by themselves? And if they notice someone who seems not to have developed friendships yet, they'll target that person. And they will walk up to the person at some point, begin a very, very casual conversation, and befriend that person. The person that they're befriending has no idea they've been approached by a cult. And they will build on that relationship. Sometimes the college recruiter on that college campus is not a member of the college community, but he knows enough about the college to pass himself off as a student. And as he builds up a relationship, he will then gradually bring a person into a cult where that person can be indoctrinated. There's a lot more to this than we could probably talk about in one class, but teenagers are especially susceptible. Even older people could be susceptible. If someone is going through a rough time, a young couple is divorcing. The husband or the wife could feel a void. If someone loses a loved one to death, there could be a void in that person's life. And any of these people going through transitions are vulnerable, and the cults know that, and that's where they capitalize.
Now, are there any specific ways that teenagers can avoid being as susceptible to cults as they are?
Well, I think yes, there are certain things that you can do, but I think we almost have to back it up a little bit. If I were a college student on campus, the reality is if I'm sitting down in the cafeteria, reading a book, having my lunch, because I don't know too many people, if a cult recruiter sees me and approaches me, I don't have the foggiest idea of what's happening. The person is not going to say, hi, I belong to Joe's cult. How would you like to join? The person will gradually build up a friendship. The person might say at that first meeting, say, I've never seen you on campus before. You new here? Yes, I am. Well, what do you think of the place so far? Well, I'm new. I haven't really had much of a chance. I like it so far. Hey, I see you've got a history book there. Do you have Professor so-and-so? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. Oh, he's pretty tough. You better watch out for him. Look, I've got to run. Best of luck to you. Maybe I'll see you around someday. And the cult recruiter is out of there. College student has no idea he's been approached by a cult. The next day, 2 days later, the cult recruiter is back, building on that. Hey, didn't I see you yesterday? How's that history class going? And gradually they'll build up a relationship. At some point, the cult member will say to the student, I really, really like the time we've spent together. You're a fabulous person. I thoroughly enjoy speaking with you. I consider you a friend. I have some other friends who I think you would really, really like. We get together, every week for meetings. We talk about college life. Sometimes we talk about religion, if it's a religious cult, or we talk about politics, if it's a political cult. I was telling them all about what a terrific person you are. How would you like to come, and join me at one of these meetings? We have food, a lot of good people there. They are dying to meet you. This is actually called love bonding. You are playing up to the recruit, making him feel very good, stroking him, making him feel like he's the center of the universe. And that's how they bring the person in. And depending upon how a cult operates, they can gradually twist that person's viewpoint, begin to help that person to feel as if his family doesn't really understand him, his friends really don't understand him, or they don't love him, or what have you, and gradually come to see that his closest friends, the people who really understand him and love him, are in the group. And it's only when they've started to twist a person's mind around, it's only gradually that they'll begin to introduce this person to the fact that he belongs to a cult with an established name. He won't know that at the outset. So it can be a long, slow process. It can also be a quicker process. Some cults will try to bring a recruit away for a weekend. And if they can get a person away for a weekend to a meeting, a weekend retreat or something or other, in just the space of 48 to 72 hours, they can manipulate that person's environment and they can twist that person's point of view. It sounds terrible to say this, but the fact of the matter is that the same way that we can delete a disk and reprogram it, people can do that to us, to our minds. You are a disk that has a certain value system, embedded within it, certain friendships, certain loves. They can erase all of that and reprogram it and turn you into a very, very different person with an entirely different worldview. So that's the real fear here. Now, you had asked earlier, what can a college student or a teenager do, not to be a target? Well, a lot of it really boils down to common sense, okay? I would suggest to any teenager who's starting out in college, when you get to college, don't make yourself a target. Don't deliberately sit all by yourself somewhere where if there is a cult member observing, he's going to notice you. The better thing to do when you first start college, join a club or two, join a team, join a sorority or a fraternity. Get a circle of friends as soon as you get to college so that when you walk into the cafeteria, you'll see people you can sit with them. If you're in the midst of other people and you seem to have some friends, generally speaking, the cult person's not going to be looking in your direction. He'll be looking for somebody else who's a loner. That would be thing number one. Thing number two, since the cults are playing on the fact that you are now separated from your parents and friends because you're living away from home and you might be hundreds of miles away, they're capitalizing on that separation. That's what puts you in transition. So another terrific thing to do is set it up with your family. We're going to be talking, you're going to call them, or you're going to text message them, or you're going to IM them, or whatever. You're going to be in constant communication with your parents. You're going to leave the lines of communication open and be in touch with them every couple of days. You don't want your parents to get used to the fact that you haven't been in touch with them for several weeks. Because if all of a sudden you're in over your head and you're pulled into a cult, weeks might pass before they even suspect that anything is wrong. But if your folks are expecting to hear from you, even if it's just a quick hello, how you doing on the phone, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, if you don't call, they might realize that something is an issue and intervene faster. So that's another good thing to do. The third thing to do is don't ever go off with anybody by yourself. Even if you develop friendships, always let somebody know where you're going. That's just common sense. Never go off with someone and nobody knows where you are. And if somebody wants to bring you somewhere, check it out. Now the chances are, if you are suspicious about this person's, then don't go anyway. But it always makes sense. If somebody says to you, I've got a group of people, we'd like you to join the group. What's the name of this group? Who's in this group? Where does this group meet? Find out about them. Just don't accept at face value what you're told. It's always better, to be safe than sorry. The best thing to do to avoid cults is don't put yourself in a position where they're looking in your direction. Let them point elsewhere. I've been teaching on the high school level, for 32 years, and a lot of our graduates come back and they visit with us once they get to college. I don't think a year has gone by when a graduate hasn't come and said to me, "I was approached by a cult." Somebody came up to me and started speaking with me, and it was exactly like you said they would in class. Thank you for saying that. So that's always very gratifying to hear. They're out there. We believe they are probably operating on virtually every college campus in America. And if we don't own up to that and take steps, not to make ourselves targets, we could be putting ourselves in a position where our lives could be ruined. I'd like to tell you a fast story. This goes back a number of years. A newspaper reporter was called in by his editor, and he was told by the editor, "I'd like you to write a story about a college that we were aware of where cults are operating on campus." And the reporter says, "Yes, sir, I'll get right to it." And the editor said, No. Hear me out. I want you to join the cult and speak from the inside." And the newspaper reporter agreed to do that. He did everything backwards. He enrolled in that college as a student, and he would deliberately go off by himself, sit all by himself in the library or in the cafeteria or in the student union center, and he ultimately attracted a cult recruiter. This cult recruiter built up a friendship with him and then invited him to go away for a weekend. He said, friends of mine rent a house out in the woods. We get together every once in a while. We just get a break from college life. The people there are terrific. You will really enjoy their company. They will enjoy your company. And the newspaper reporter knew what was going on. But he went to see what this was all about. And when he got out into the woods in this residence, he found that there were other people from other colleges who had also been brought in. And once he arrived on the scene, he was really in for the shock of his life. The person who brought him there vanished. And 2 other cult members kind of double-teamed him. And they spent a great deal of time talking to him, asking him questions about himself, making him feel like the center of the universe. At the same time, they kept him talking to exhaust him. They had him remove his watch, so he didn't know what time it was. And they gradually moved him into an inside room without windows, so he didn't know when nightfall happened. They would build into this whole thing, maybe going into a yoga room where it was very, very warm, where there might be the smell of incense, anything to kind of get him drowsy. They would feed him food that didn't have any caffeine, no sugar, anything that could revitalize him. And they manipulated his environment to make him susceptible to suggestion. It's almost like putting him in a hypnotic state. It's known as an altered state. And between gleaning a lot of information about him and putting him in this state where he can accept suggestions, he was putty in their hands. By Sunday, all the other college students who were there had already signed statements giving all of their personal possessions to the group, making a commitment to the group, rejecting their families in just the space of 48 hours. And he said, when he wrote his article, I wanted to join too. I knew exactly who they were. I knew exactly what they were doing. I knew they were manipulating me. But the way they did this was so powerful, I couldn't resist. And he found himself on a Sunday afternoon in the front room of this house. And he said to himself, it's now or never. If I don't get out now, I may never get out. And taking everybody by surprise, he literally, thank God he was on the first floor, threw himself out the window. And he started running like heck to the edge of the property, with 2 cult members chasing him every step of the way. And they did not catch him. There was a newspaper car waiting for him that whisked him away. But the other part of the story, which is even more frightening, is if the cult members had caught him, what would they have done?
Well, that's left up to discussion, but that's about all we've got time for today. Now, thanks for joining me today, Dad.
My pleasure.
Today we've learned a lot about cults. We've learned what a cult is, different types of cults, about how many people in America are involved in them, a quite staggering number, and how as teenagers we could avoid being in cults. Thanks for joining me today on Reali-Teen.